So what has President Buhari been saying to Nigerians in the wake of massive anger about the new naira notes and the protests that have broken out? As you may know, there have been manifest public expressions of dissent in a number of cities, and earlier in the day President Buhari spoke to the nation saying that the old 200 naira notes can still be used for the next 60 days. This would appear to be welcome news to the millions who've been unable to get their hands on any cash in the banks. But will it quell the anger just 9 days before what could be the most significant elections in Nigeria's history? Well, in a moment, we'll get detailed analysis about what Mr. Buhari said. But first, here's a snippet from his address.
And I shall remain committed to my oath of protecting and advancing the interests of Nigerians and the nation at all times. During the extended phase of the deadline for currency swap, I listened to invaluable pieces of advice from well-meaning citizens and institutions across the nation. I similarly consulted widely with representatives of the state governors as well as the Council of State. Above all, as an administration that respects the rule of law, I have also noted that the subject matter is before the courts of our land and some pronouncements have been made. To further ease the supply pressures, particularly to our citizens, I have given approval to the CBN that the old 200 naira banknotes be released back into circulation, and that it should also be allowed to circulate as legal tender with the new 200 naira, 500 naira, and 1,000 naira banknotes for 60 days from February 10th, 2023 to April 10th, 2023, when the old 200 naira notes ceases to be legal tender.
President Buhari. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the former chairman of the respected think tank, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Kyari Bukar, who is also the MD and CEO of the Central Securities Depository of the Nigerian capital markets, and is currently part of a clutch of other businesses, including the Africa operations of Inlax, the banking and e-payment firm. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Good evening, Charles. Thank you.
Let's start with your reaction to what President Buhari has been saying to Nigerians in the wake of all the anger over the new banknotes. He said he felt pain for what he called the unintended outcomes of the policy, and in consequence had decided to extend by 2 months the deadline for handing in the 200 naira notes.
Yes, I think that's more of what he had witnessed as the unintended consequences of the program. I think as laudable as it is, especially when one looks at the legacy that he wanted to leave of having a free and fair elections that is not polluted by naira notes, so to speak. And I believe the aim is great. The execution, however, was quite difficult. It may also be deliberate in the sense that they don't want to see a large proliferation of the larger notes in circulation until possibly after the elections. I mean, I'm not getting this from anybody. This is just a conjecture or a speculation on my part. But when one looks at goes through the speech of Mr. President, there are some factors, there are 5 or 10 factors that affects inflation. One of them is actually velocity of money in circulation, right? If there is too high a velocity, it contributes, even minimally, to inflation.
Well, I was going to come to your expertise in the economy, but I just wanted to get your reaction to the fact that he's extended the deadline by 2 months for handing in the 200 naira notes, because theoretically it gives the sense of some relief.
Correct.
But the central bank still has to be able to inject that money back into the system, and that could still potentially create problems, couldn't it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, what will happen is that some of the ATMs are not even functional these days. But with the 200 naira notes, I mean, it can be still a pain getting it at 200 rate than 1,000. So you have to dish out 5 of those notes for 1,000. Therefore, the filling up of ATMs or the refueling of ATMs would be more frequent. But also, I would imagine that the central bank would allow over-the-counter transactions on both the old and the new 200 naira notes. Now, if that were to happen, then there may be some relief. And at the transactional side in the open markets, I think a lot of people at the lower end of the economic ladder may actually be quite okay with the smaller denomination notes, which includes
they're taking
the 200,
them in small bits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that might have some pressure relief.
I mean, it's people like you who bring them out in.
I haven't actually seen the new notes yet, which basically means that the e-channel, I mean, somebody like me who started the campaign and evangelizing of electronic payments
I remember that.
in 2004
Yes.
in this country, is happy to see this. The only thing is that the path was, the execution wasn't as smooth.
Yeah,
as
but let me
expected
pick
it
you
to
up
be.
on that then,
Right,
because I mean, I was going to ask you, have you been trying to locate some naira yourself? If so, how are you doing in that regard? Or are you getting by with e-payments because you represent a banking and e-payment firm, don't you?
I was sharing a story last week when I checked into the Hilton, and the person that helped me with my bag ordinarily pull out, bank notes to give them as a tip. Last week I had to ask for his account, and did a transfer.
Well, that's jolly
so
nice of you,
that's how prolific it was. But these days, even the electronic channels have been inundated by heavy traffic. And some of the carrying capacity of the banks have been tested via those channels as well. So I have seen and heard people who have had frustrations with even the electronic transfers. So it's a combination of things. But I mean, if you try it, you can try it again in the case of transfers. But when you are doing it in front of a merchant, then it becomes a problem.
Absolutely.
You might not walk away with the goods.
Yep.
And in the process, it might affect the economy negatively,
Yes.
Because there are no exchange of goods and services and transaction.
Absolutely. Well, now that you've brought it up, I mean, you brought it up earlier, but we deferred it to this point, and you brought it up again. So let's turn to your area of masterful expertise, if you like, which is the economic perspective. These banknotes are being got rid of because the central bank wants to mop up the cash that's outside the banking system, which was increasing inflation, apparently, putting pressure on the naira, as well as a huge amount of counterfeiting. How would you assess the impact of this policy on all those economic areas?
The value of the policy to the economy can only be seen, a few months or maybe a couple of years down the road.
Yeah.
And that would happen when we realize that the electronic channel transactions have grown, say, by 40% or 50% within a short period of time, rather than the marginal increases we've been seeing over the last few years. So essentially what that means is that people will see the value in the electronic channel. One is cost of cash. Cash is an expensive, in fact, it's so expensive that some of the things that we believe are the nice things about cash, it presents anonymity, it presents instant transactional capabilities, etc., etc., when you compare it to the costs associated with dealing with cash, it becomes so negative that any economy would wish to remove cash altogether.
What are those costs that you're talking?
So the cost of carrying the cash, printing the cash, storing the cash, transporting the cash, all of those are very expensive to the economy. The other thing is the one that Mr. President stressed in the speech, which is hoarding of cash. Hoarding of cash also has an inflationary pressure because essentially people have lost trust and therefore they hoard the cash for some other effect. But if it is in the banking system and it is electronic, not only may they be earning on those cash, but one knows that you have it. Of course, there are additional risks of cyber security and all of the other things, but the cost to those is minimal compared to the costs associated with cash and cash management. All of those are factors that affect inflation. But the other thing is, of course, the ones you've mentioned, counterfeiting, terrorism, money laundering, bribery and corruption. All of those are effects that have to do with cash. And the unique one about it in Nigeria is cash being used for vote buying.
Right. Well, let's come to that then, because the central bank and President Buhari have said that there was a lot of cash in old currency hidden away by some Nigerians, and with the elections not far off, it was necessary to mop up all that cash that was supposedly stashed away by politicians to be used in vote buying. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that is it's true. I mean, because it had happened in previous elections. And if anything to go by, one can extrapolate that the next election would also see a similar behavior, maybe even with a lot of gusto. Now, with this policy in place, it may be a challenge to do so. I mean, if you do transfers, it would be traceable. So essentially,
and you'd have to do a heck of a lot of transfers.
Exactly. So I mean, I'm not going to discount people. People have all means and manner of things that
well,
they
I mean,
can do.
our political editor, sorry to interrupt you,
Yes.
Sumner Sambo, was saying earlier that we're starting to hear that IOUs
may be issued. Yes.
Are potentially being issued. I mean, isn't that extraordinary, really?
Yeah, quite recently I heard that, the abuse of the naira at parties in Lagos. There are now vouchers being printed, I understand, or tokens being printed that are being used. So there are creative ways of overcoming certain things. But at the end of the day, one has to make a lot of effort to bypass these policy initiatives.
Yeah, but you have a lot of knowledge about banking systems. I mean, your firm at the moment it does e-payments, but it also does banking stuff.
Right.
I mean,
Banking
so you must have an idea of whether or not these politicians, I mean, because that's what we hear, whether they are in collusion with bankers and so on and so forth to have monies sort of transferred, and that potentially could be one of the reasons why we're seeing a scarcity. I mean,
yeah, I think this scarcity, I don't know, maybe deliberate, or the central bank.
Well, you mentioned that.
Yeah, this central bank may also be tracing, where the cash or the bank notes go,
right,
and if they are being fed into the ATMs and what have you. Now,
so does that make it less likely
for it to end up
huge
in large amounts in someone's hands?
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean.
So that's what I mean by saying that these measures of the last few days and also possibly for the next few weeks might actually be deliberately done in such a manner that huge volume of cash may not
in the context of what you're saying. Correct. It makes sense.
Yes.
So scarcity of cash a fuel shortage, lots of anger and protests on the streets. What's the impact of all this likely to be on next week's elections in your assessment?
In my assessment, the effect on the election is that I think for the first time we might see an election that may not be underwritten by cash. And by that I mean that vote buying, a la the previous elections, would not come to pass. And therefore supremacy of ideas and issue-oriented conversations probably would, above all else, be the determinant of the outcome of the elections. So in that regard, the opposition parties, compared to the current government's party, might actually feel energized. Whereas, of course, the incumbent party that is in power would also want to say, yeah, we have the legacy, if they can recast themselves in that manner. But even they are complaining. Because at the end of the day, as a politician, you want to empathize with the electorate. And today, the situation is so dire that one has to, a politician worth their, salt would actually suggest that the citizenry is in dire needs of a relief. I think that's probably why Mr. President came out this morning to give this speech. At least there would be some relief up until the elections.
Right. But do you think that the specific insecurity that's occurring because of this cash shortage could combine with the already existing problems of banditry, insurgency, and terrorism to really create some serious threats to that election?
To the elections, probably not. What I say to people is that you have an opportunity to make a statement, and that statement is to say, use your PVC if you're not happy with this current situation. And that may actually be something that as human beings, we, the Nigerian citizens, on average, need to exercise an unbelievable amount of patience in saying that, well, hang on, it's about 4 years. It's time for me to make my voice heard. And if that is what the average citizen would think, then it may not actually be for naught.
Somebody wrote that what is happening now reminds him of Chinua Achebe's classic book, Things Fall Apart. Do you believe that in light of all this, the center will hold on election day in 9 days' time with all this build up to those vital elections?
Well, I think I would just stay with the first part of the phrase, things fall apart. For now.
In the circumstances.
Yes. I mean, as a nation, we've gone through a lot of, we've gone close to the edge, so to speak, on many occasions. People have written us off. But as a country, we have pulled together and come back and demonstrated an uncanny resilience. And I believe that Nigerians and Nigeria would show to the world that we are a resilient folk.
Right. Well, but I mean, let me put this additional question to you. I don't know how much legal knowledge you have, but is there a conflict in your assessment between President Buhari's decision on this cash swap policy and the moves that are taking place at the Supreme Court with regard to this issue?
I wish that the Supreme Court would actually make their final ruling very quickly, I mean, the idea of postponing things and putting things in abeyance would make it difficult. The other element is that even though I do not have the legal authority to comment on, however, as a layperson, and my lawyer friends would say, why did you present yourself as a layperson and still go ahead and make a pronouncement? One of the things that I believe is that the central banks, the act that formed the central bank, there are certain powers within that act, and currency is one of such. Now, the fact that even after the deadline, if you were to present the old notes to the central bank and the central bank can take it, basically indicates to me that that's within the act that established the central bank. Now, if you bring in 10 million naira, then they may begin to question where you've been hiding such. But in generality, if you just stumble on a few thousand naira under your mattress or something, and you took it there, I don't think they would even question you in terms of accepting it and, you know, crediting your account with a commercial bank, since central bank doesn't have account opening feature for a citizen. So I think that basically lays to rest even the legal shenanigans going on in the Supreme Court. I wouldn't call it shenanigans, but I think there is a posturing done by the governors in terms of what they have done in taking the case and looking for an interpretation, if you will, from the central bank, I mean from the Supreme Court to be the final arbiter of this disagreement.
So in the final analysis, I mean, it's all about money, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, whether it's cash or e-payments. I mean, you're running an e-payments firm, so you're sort of likely to profit tremendously from this as time goes on. I mean,
yes, Inlux is a software.
but you'd have to build capacity.
Yes,
and all
Inlux
the
is a
rest of
software
it.
company for the banks.
Right.
And even central banks are our customers. About 16 or so African central banks are our clients, where we have deployed our technology.
So they'd be
with
coming
them.
to you to
So
expand.
we believe that
expand.
we will have more opportunity as time goes on with the possibility of some of our applications being used by either the commercial and other financial institutions, including insurance and investment houses, plus some of the central banks across Africa. So it presents an opportunity for us.
But of course, with that opportunity comes, you know, bigger threats as well, doesn't it?
Exactly, because the competition is also not going to fold their arms. So we do know that, and so it's going to be who has the best solutions to offer the market.
Yeah, but I also mean things like cyber threats and so on.
Exactly, that's another angle to
Yeah.
the players within the e-payment space. They will, you know, and the banks as well.
Right.
You know, once you have the proliferation of transactions, just like, you know, asking the famous American bank robber, you know, why do you rob banks? Because money is there. So essentially, the hackers would be going after those infrastructure because they feel there is money there. So essentially, the more money there, the higher the risk. Therefore, the more the need to protect it, and also train and educate the average user not to give their identity away, or their token or passwords or whatever, or pins away. And I think the banks are doing a good job. But I think based on even what Mr. President has said this morning, I would also expect the central bank to embark on sensitization, raising of awareness, education, and maybe even town halls, if that is possible.
Absolutely fascinating talking with you, as always. Kyari Bukar is the former chairman of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He was also the MD and CEO of the Central Securities Depository of the Nigerian Capital Markets, and is currently CEO of the Africa operations of Inlax, the banking and e-payment firm. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.